Guys, welcome to the live stream. This is a really nice opportunity for you guys to have the opportunity, well, just to take the chance to ask some questions about the assessment next week. I've obviously got Josh in the chat, and I can see that we have a couple of other people viewing as well. If you are able to sort of state who you are in the chat, and so I know who you are, and if you have any questions, if someone could also let me know that you can actually hear me, that would be really helpful. It's difficult to watch the stream back as well as run it at the same time. So if someone can let me know that you can actually hear me, that would be fantastic. There is a little delay. It's about 15 to 20 seconds. So if you do post a question and you think I'm not answering it, it's probably because I haven't seen it yet. And if you see me looking down to the side here, it's because I'm looking for questions in the chat. Now, I do have the slides from the revision session up ready to share with you guys. If there's some specific elements of the questions that I covered and you want to go back over them, I'd be more than happy to navigate to those specific slides and we can take it from there. But if there is something that's kind of weighing on your mind and you want to kind of cover that off, I'm also happy to try and address specific questions that you guys may have. But I need those questions posted in the chat, folks. If you don't ask any questions, I can't answer them. So please don't be shy and just fire away in the chat. There are no bad questions. And I'd rather get that right before we go into the exam. So please do post something. If you are sat on a question and you're not quite sure to ask it, then please do let me know and I can try to address it. So again, just while I'm waiting for people to kind of pluck up some bravery and ask a question, obviously the exam is structured into 4 individual questions. The questions that are going to be covered are covering the quantitative side of things, so the things where we're using numbers to try and better understand data sets and make comparisons, will be questions 1 and 2, and that's very similar to the structure that you see on the mock exam. Again, the mock exam represents a really accurate representation of exactly what you guys are going to be expected to do on the exam itself. So please do take a look at that. Go through the questions, review the lecture content from the lecture that I gave on Monday. And if you've got specific questions or something that you're not quite sure about with regards to the content or the best way of addressing something or interpreting the data, whatever it might be, then please do let me know and I can try and provide a little bit of additional clarity. So I see we've got 4 viewers coming in. Again, if you've just joined the stream, please don't be shy. If you could let me know who you are. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we can take it from there. Again, I've a couple of extra people just dropped in. If you've just joined the stream, guys, please just put a message in the chat so I know that you are able to join in, and if you have questions, please do post them. The whole point of this session is a Q&A, so if you can post some questions in the chat, that would be fantastic. Excellent. I have a question. Please do fire away. Yeah, excellent. So we've got Ankitra Banashi 7004. Please do just ask your question in the chat. That would be really helpful and I can address it from there. Again, guys, if you are sat on a question, please just post it. I can do them in order or as they come up. And if things are, your question might inspire something in someone else as well. So please just take the opportunity to pop those in the chat if you get the opportunity. So just to make you guys aware, I can see this. Fantastic. So the questions come in. I can't actually read it on the screen. So it says, in yesterday's class for question number 1, you have given the answer or the process of doing exam, as it's my first time giving exam in the UK as an international student. Yeah, so if you have a specific question off the back of that, I'm more than happy to kind of round on that. Rochelle Porteous just joined, can't see anything. That's not ideal. I don't know what I can do on you on that front. Maybe try refreshing your browser and take it from there. But I think in regards to maybe a little bit of clarity over the question 1 structure would be helpful. So let's maybe go through that now whilst other people are joining. So again, with regards to the structure of question 1, we can see here that essentially you're going to get presented with a scenario, okay? And the scenario is going to be like essentially somebody leaning on your expertise as a researcher to try and to allow you to design a study to answer a specific question. Again, we do research projects to ask questions, and then we design projects to answer them in a sort of meaningful way. And therefore, this particular scenario gives you the context of looking at children's engagement levels in physical activity outside of school. And it gives you a little bit more kind of context as to there's a teacher looking for support who doesn't have experience in research. And it asks you to do a range of different things. So what it wants you to do is provide or come up with a study design in that context. So how would you go about monitoring children's activity levels within a school so that you could say how effective or how you might go about doing that? And again, all of the marks and the way that I answered the question within the session kind of breaks down the types of things that you would want to kind of touch on. So if I just bring those up here, since this is kind of a repetition of what I've already shown, it shouldn't be that new information. But ultimately, I'm stating a design that's appropriate. So a cross-sectional survey study is the most appropriate design here because we're going in on a one-off occasion and we're assessing either engagement or physical activity levels in school children at a given time point. And that's exactly what a cross-sectional study would go in and achieve. I would need to state how many people I would want in that study. And again, the examples are quite generic, but that gives you a nice platform for being quite inventive and innovative and thinking about different ways of approaching that. I've stated the sampling method. Again, we have a whole session dedicated to doing sampling methodologies. And therefore, it's going to be really important for you guys to be able to indicate how exactly you'd go about getting that. And again, the question specifically asks you for a time frame. So how over what period of time would you want to be doing that? And when I say the question refers to a time frame, I'm specifically referring to the fact that the specific study design here indicates at the top, including intended sample size, sampling technique, and time frame for the study. And as I said in the session, you could do a really big elaborate section on the design, but there's only 2 marks available for the design. And therefore, it really encourages you to make sure you check off each of the individual components of this question to make sure that you're giving a slightly more rounded question or rounded answer to the scenario that you've been presented with. So again, I think the question there was with regards to process. So again, I'm not telling you or dictating to you that you should answer in this exact specific way. All I'm saying is that your answer should include all of these individual components to allow you to fully round out the answer that you've just given there. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more context as to kind of what we're looking for. And so try and emphasize the fact that, the question is asking you for multiple different components. So if you miss out one of those components, you're going to lose marks because the marking schedule is trying to encourage you to ensure that you are looking across the scenario rather than just acutely at any given one part. So I hope Rochelle Porteous, I hope you managed to figure out your technical issues and you've joined in. Okay, Doran here. Thank you, Doran. Thanks for joining. Again, I can see we've got 8 viewers in total, which is great for the session. If anybody has a specific question or wants anything a specific addressing, that would be fantastic. Again, please don't be shy, guys. This is, I know it's a different format. It's just I've used this format in different ways over the past few years, and it basically is a platform to ensure that you guys have the opportunity to ask questions, sat from home, sat from wherever. So please don't be shy. Again, it's a rare opportunity to have just to be able to ask questions freely, and being able to benefit from the answers. Whilst you guys are thinking about the types of things you might want to cover, I'll go into the second section of this question once again. So again, the scenario is about measuring physical activity levels in school kids. And therefore, we can start to apply some of our background knowledge, but essentially we want to be able to quantify, we want to be able to generate data so we can use numbers to be able to answer this specific question for this person. And therefore, there's lots of ways of doing that. And, using a questionnaire is one way of doing that. Or you could ask individuals to use a heart rate monitor or an accelerometer or a step counter. They're all ways of generating data that are associated with physical activity levels. And therefore, we can kind of lean on that a little bit. I can see another question that has just come in here. So it says, question, please go over the table again, SPSS results, once more about when to read the top line versus the bottom line. And then we've also got Doran coming in. I would like to ask if the interview form from the exam question 3 is posted in advance. Doran, just to be absolutely crystal clear, I'm only covering questions 1 and 2 today, but I can post that question over to Joanne and she'll be able to provide extra clarity on how she intends to do that. From my understanding, the questionnaire transcript isn't posted in advance, but the journal article is. And therefore, you can take it from there. But I'll get Joanne to confirm that with you, absolutely. So let's go to the SPSS content, since we've had a specific question about that. Let me just get an appropriate view, and we'll go over there now. So, the table. Excellent. So, as I said to you before, let me just widge over this way and then we can kind of go from there. So you're going to be presented with a data table that looks very similar to this. Now, I'm not necessarily saying it's definitely going to be an independent samples t-test, or it could be a correlation analysis, but a data table will be presented to you and it could look very similar to this. Now, when we've done the workshops across the unit, we've kind of spent some time interpreting the data. And that's the key thing that I want you guys to take away from this, is that familiarizing yourselves with the contents of these tables is going to be really important. And again, appreciating an independent samples t-test in this way is going to be very important. So I would spend a little bit of time making sure that you feel familiar with the contents of these types of tables so that you can do what I did in the lecture session. So again, oh, sorry, I've just knocked my camera with my feet. Let's drag it back. There we go. Fantastic. Okay, so the first part of the table shows the group statistics. Okay, so I have this right in front of me, which is what I'm looking at as well. And you can see, the question or the context of the data is understanding this comparison between two different types of PE lesson. So one is going to be on a traditional model, and one is going to be on the sport education curriculum model. Again, 2 different types of lessons. We can't undertake the same lesson at the same time, and therefore we have 2 distinct groups. Excuse me. And specifically 2 distinct classes over time. They're not necessarily the same people. They're just undertaking these different lessons in at different times. And we want to compare the amount of physical activity that's undertaken in those 2 sessions. So what this table shows us is the amount of time in minutes in moderate vigorous physical activity. And that's what we see on this very far hand side here, moderate vigorous physical activity minutes per lesson. And we have the traditional approach and we have the sport education approach here. You can see that there's 30 individual participants in each of those groups, which indicates that there is going to be 60 participants in total. And we can see, because we know the unit is in minutes, we can see the average or the mean, the calculated mean number of minutes completed, and the standard deviation of that. So again, the types of things that I really want to be honing in on is just looking at the table and making sure that my understanding of the content of the table is decent. So I'm identifying the number of participants. As I said to you in the class, you get some really easy marks from just being able to read the table correctly. And therefore, I would strongly advise that you become very familiar with doing this. So number of participants, there's 30 in each group, which means there's 60 in total. We can see the mean, which has been reported to the 0.0001, but the likelihood is your question will ask you to report these values to the nearest 2 decimal places or 1 decimal place, so some rounding is needed. And we can see instantly when I make a comparison between these two, sorry, just grab my mouse. When I make a comparison between these two means, there is a difference. Like if we think about an average PE lesson taking maybe 45 minutes, 50 minutes, that the total amount of time spent in this zone, well, 8 minutes average difference or thereabouts, 7.4 minutes difference is potentially a meaningful difference. But we need to know if it's a true meaningful difference by undertaking our statistical test and removing our interpretation away from that entirely. The other one is the standard deviation. We know and we understand that the standard deviation represents the average deviation of each data point away from the mean. So it shows how well clustered the data set is to the mean and how well spread out they are. And we also know that if we're doing an independent samples t-test, that this variation becomes quite important, because one of the assumptions that an independent samples t-test is making is that there is equal variances between the two distinct groups. If there wasn't equal variances, then that's going to be a problem, and we can't assume those things. So again, like even just by reading the table, I can start to kind of trigger some things from the workshop, which is going to be important and meaningful for me. So if we continue sort of dissecting this table, it then leads me on to thinking about Levene's test for equality of variances. And again, it's asking that question, is the variance between these two averages of these means, is it meaningful? Is there a difference between the variance? Is the data more spread out in one group than the other? Is the other way of thinking of that. Now, I'm obviously going to then look at my significance testing, and I've identified here that it's greater than 0.05, which is our significance threshold that we use across most statistical testing. Again, it's arbitrarily set, but that's what we tend to use in most fields that most of you are dealing in. If it's greater than that, that means there is no significant difference between the variance of these groups, and therefore I can assume equal variances. Equal variances assumed. And therefore, I can then start to ignore sections of the table, and I can start to draw my attention to specific sections of the table. I can effectively ignore this entire bottom line now, because my equal variances are assumed. There is no difference between the variance in the group, and therefore I would read off the top line of this particular section of the table. Now my big head is in the way, so if I just flip across to the other side, now that we know what we're reading on this table, we've got our t-statistic, we've got our degrees of freedom, and we've got our significance reporting, which is two-tailed. Again, we wouldn't necessarily know whether activity levels are going to go up or down in relation to each other, and therefore two-tailed is appropriate. We can see the mean difference has been reported, which is kind of confirming what we've already seen in the mean differences when we actually had a look at them. And we've got our confidence intervals, which indicate that the true mean with 95% confidence sits somewhere between -4 and -10, but crucially, it doesn't cross 0, which confirms why we have a significant difference between the two groups. And therefore, we can indicate that the average amount of time that is spent in moderate vigorous physical activity between traditional and sport education lessons is different. And it's different by around about 7 minutes. And we can say that with over 95% confidence, and we confirm that with our p-value from there. So Ankita has come in and said, again about significance, please. Again, there's two significance values we need to concern ourselves with here. The Levene's test for equality of variances is looking as to whether the variance of the means is different from one another. and in this case it isn't. Therefore, equal variances can be assumed. And then the second significance is whether there is a difference in the mean amount of time spent in each of these different groups. And we can see here, because the p-value is less than 0.05, it's 0.000, doesn't report to any further value than that, we can say with certainty that there is a significant difference between the average amount of time spent in moderate vigorous physical activity in each of the two distinct lessons. We can say that the average difference is 7.4 minutes, and we can say with 95% confidence that the true value sits somewhere between -4 and 10.3. So what this is showing is, I can say with 95% confidence that the true mean difference between these two different sets of participants is somewhere between these two values. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of clarity as to how to approach that. So if again, just to take a restep, I know it's an independent samples t-test. We have two distinct PE groups here, 30 participants in each group with a mean difference reported down here, but I can eyeball the mean. I can see that the standard deviation from the two groups is fairly similar. So 6.5 and 4.8, again, if they were massively different, that would be a red flag for me thinking about Levene's test of equality of variances. Levene's test for equality of variances is formalizing the test and asking the question whether that variance is significantly different from one another. Because if it is, we have to treat the data differently, and we would go equal variances not assumed. But if it isn't significant, then equal variances can be assumed, and therefore we would read off the top line. If equal variance is not assumed, this value was less than 0.05. It was significantly different. You would then go equal variances not assumed from there. Hopefully that helps to address that specific question. Again, my advice to you would be to go to the teaching week where we cover independent samples t-tests. There is at least 4 examples for you to run through with associated data as well. I think on that session, I've also included the data tables on Brio, so you have opportunities to practice interpreting the data sets so that you feel comfortable and enabled to be able to for you to be able to interpret those data sets. Again, So again, what if it's greater than 0.05? I'm going to make the assumption that question refers specifically to this section here, because we covered that quite comprehensively on the Levene's test. I mean, in the chat, guys, does anyone feel confident answering that question? What if the significance value for the t-test of equality of means, what if this is above 0.05? Can anybody answer that in the chat? What would that tell me about the teaching approaches and the amount of minutes spent in moderate vigorous physical activity? Does anybody feel confident in answering that question? Okay, I'm not having a massive response in the chat. So with that in mind, let's have a little bit of think about what's going on. So we're effectively asking the question, if I change my pointer option here. Again, fundamentally my question is, do children spend more time physically active if they undertake a traditional approach to PE lessons or they take a sport education approach to PE lessons? What I'm asking is are these means truly different from one another when we take into account the number of participants and the variation of that data set? In this particular results table, the they are significantly different from one another. But what would be the types of things that I might anticipate or speculate on if they weren't different from one another? Well, the first thing is that the mean values would be much closer. There wouldn't be a big difference between the two of them, even when I was just eyeballing the data, particularly if the standard deviations are similar as well. Now, that's not always the case. I'm simplifying it somewhat. If you had very sort of similar-ish means, but very, very small standard deviations, there could be a chance that that is a meaningful difference, but that's a conversation for a different day. But ultimately, there would be a little bit more sort of skepticism as to whether a true difference was there, and we can kind of estimate that from just looking at the data set itself. Now, if they were close together, and therefore with a similar amount of error, if this p-value was greater than 0.05, essentially what we're indicating there is that there is no meaningful difference between the number of minutes spent in each of moderate vigorous physical activity between these two different sessions. We're basically saying that we can't say with confidence that there is a true difference between the activities of those two different groups. Therefore, we can't say with any certainty that the traditional approach or the sport education approach results in any greater or any different amount of physical activity in those particular students. And therefore, we would say there is no significant difference between the two values because of the lack of significance that we see. And the likelihood is the 95% confidence interval would actually span 0. Some people's would have gone up, some would have gone down, and we wouldn't say with 95% confidence that the true difference is either positive or negative. We just simply wouldn't know, because either the variation is too great or the difference is too small between the groups. And that has an influence on the way that we write and report the findings. So again, just while other people are thinking about any questions they may have, and I can try, again, hopefully you're warming to the idea of the live stream and you're kind of feeling inspired to ask some questions. Please do. I would be more than happy to answer them. But let's see, again, like when I then go to the interpretation, so this is just about reading out the data from the table. But when I then to come and interpret the data, I gave this example here. So it says, what can you interpret about the results of the study from the significance values shown from the independent sample t-test presented? You should use the mean scores to help you with your answer. So again, it's asking you to put the findings of the analysis back into context. It's asking you to apply the data that's in the table to the real world scenario of comparing these different teaching methodologies. And therefore, we can say here that there is a statistically significant difference in moderate vigorous physical activity between the two teaching approaches. And I've reported the p-value from the table here, less than 0.001. You could put p equals 0.000. Children in the sport education group with a mean of 33 minutes achieve significantly more minutes of moderate vigorous physical activity per lesson than those in the traditional group. And I've reported the means here because you should use the mean scores to help you with your answer. Well, I've done that now. I've reported the mean scores. Now, you could argue here that I haven't given a unit here. So I could improve the quality of this answer actually by indicating that this is minutes. So I would have 33.07 minutes. I know it's indicated in the text here, but that's generally not how we do it. We put the unit after the vector, if you like, or the number. And then I've reported it for both, and therefore I go on in the next section to actually report the mean difference that's been calculated. So this suggests that sport education model may be more effective at increasing children's physical activity levels during PE lessons. The large mean difference of 7.4 minutes is both statistically and practically meaningful. So again, if I was to then break down the mark schedule, let me just change my view so you guys can actually read it. So I've got 2 marks for identifying statistical significance. I can interpret the data table correctly and apply it in the context of the research scenario that's been presented. I've got 2 marks for correctly comparing the means. So I've reported the means and I've compared them appropriately. I've indicated which group is which mean and how that is interpreted in terms of the context of the question. One is higher than the other in the context of moderate, vigorous physical activity minutes during that lesson. 2 marks for drawing a valid and well-reasoned conclusion. again, I've gone one step further and I've put that into a real world scenario of how that particular teaching model might be appropriate in improving or enhancing or increasing the amount of physical activity that individuals undertake during PE lessons. And I've even gone so far to say that that average is 7.4 minutes, which is both statistically and practically meaningful. Again, if you're doing a PE lesson every single day and you manage to get children to exercise or be in that intensity level, on average 7.4 minutes over consecutive days, that tots up, and that's a meaningful difference. So again, and I just want to highlight here that every single question you get in the exam, it will indicate how many marks you have available. And therefore, taking this kind of mentality of breaking down exactly what's being asked and how you can use the data that's available to you to try and pick off those points is going to be hugely beneficial for you. If you only put there's a statistically significant difference between the two teaching approaches, you might get a single mark for that because you haven't used the means, you've not given context, you've not applied it, and you've not indicated, you know, how you could use that in the real world. Like, it's just not a high quality answer. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more context as to how I might interpret the data from the table, how I might then ensure that I'm using that data to my advantage, and also then how I can apply that to the original question, the original setting for the question, which was comparing the amount of activity children undertake when they do those different lessons. So I'm just having a look at the chat again, guys. I was hoping for a few more questions. If people wouldn't mind just popping some in, that would be really helpful. I suppose the question, I'll ask you guys a question, see if we can get some engagement going on. So for those that are watching, which section of the exam are you most concerned about? And if you are concerned about it, what is it that's making you feel concerned? And that could be across both sections. It's useful feedback to know. I can think about it in terms of question 1 and 2. I can obviously address straight away. But if there's things that are bothering you about questions 3 and 4, obviously I sit in the same office as Joanne, so I can definitely make her aware. She's going to be covering some extra revision sessions with you guys on Friday, of which I obviously strongly recommend that you attend, so that you can maximise your opportunity for doing well on this exam. But what are you most concerned about? How are you guys preparing? Things like that. I can see we have 5 people watching, so I can. I'm going to push for a response. I've done enough live streams now to know that a bit of patience goes a long way. So please do just share. Again, if there's a specific section of the exam that you are worried about, concerned about. Oh, I'm talking to myself here, which is not ideal. Yep, if there's anything I can be specific about, that would be really helpful. I can then guide you to that. Okay, with that in mind, I think if nobody does have any further questions, or if they don't want me to cover any further parts, I will start thinking about wrapping up the live stream. So I'm going to push for a final flurry, if you like. If you are starting a question and you want to ask it, it's now or never, guys. So I'm keeping my eye on the chat. Again, last opportunity, guys. In fact, I'll put it back up on the screen so you guys can see who's engaging. Okay, guys, I will wrap it up there then. I hope you found this little session useful. Thank you for those who did ask questions. It does help in terms of just making sure that I can try and be as specific as possible. If you're thinking or have an issue and you think there's a problem, the likelihood is there's other people on the course who feel the same way. So don't be shy. Again, available for email or follow-up if you need it. But other than that, I wish you all the best of luck in your preparations for next week. And make sure you study, review the sessions, ask questions, speak to your friends, do that sort of thing. But other than that, I wish you all the best of luck, and I will see you all next week. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.